Okay, welcome back. So when we last left off, we were talking about monumental scale and the idea of the illusion of monumental scale on a small size. But scale doesn't only have to be about being big. Scale and the way size and relative size works in a work of art can also be a lot about being small. And so we often talk about monumental scale, and we talk about the opposite being intimate scale. The idea that at a small size, things tend to have a sense of being more precious, more intimate, more contemplative. And so scale is, only part of it, so that like something like this, the scale, right, from the Book of Kells, this page here, the scale is a lot about getting us to pay attention to the delicateness and the intricateness and the complexity. So the scale, and also it helps us make it more kind of like more a thing that we can get lost in. Whereas the scale of the Morandi is much more about, it helps us feel the kind of the quiet, contemplative intimateness of the painting. Whereas the scale of this kind of intimate scale here is maybe more it helps make the piece even more friendly. I wanted to talk about one modern, one 20th century artist and one contemporary artist who both kind of play with scale. So one of the artists was Claes Oldenburg, and we have a couple of pieces of his here. A brief aside, the knife ship here was originally made not as a work of permanent sculpture, but as a part of a performance piece. It was a boat that functioned as a parade float, including having performers on the boat, and it was all part. The parade with the knife ship was all part of the piece. But then after the parade, it was installed as a work of sculpture, and then it became such a popular piece that he made a number of permanent pieces based off of that. And here we have some other famous pieces by Oldenburg. The Cherry Bridge, or Spoon Bridge, is probably the most famous piece, and of all of Oldenburg's pieces, that would probably be the one that would show up on a test. But I wanted to also compare him to a contemporary artist who also plays with scale. This is Fire Truck by Charles Ray, which I think is a very clever piece. It's an actual scale fire truck, which seems like, well, that's pretty obvious. Aren't all fire trucks actual scale? But what it is that he made a working fire truck that is actual scale, the scale of a real size fire truck, but it's a blown up version of a toy fire truck. So all the proportional decisions are based on like what it would be for a toy, but then it's done in life scale, and it's a really kind of interesting play on scale to make something that should be small, should be not life size, become life size. So scale is an important part of hierarchy and the contrast of scale. Like in a work of art, so far we've just been talking about scale in terms of like the overall scale of a piece, like what size is this painting or what size is this sculpture. But scale is also an important part in terms of the different parts within a piece, like this shape in this painting compared to that shape in this painting. And you can see that especially clearly in a piece like this, in the Palette of Namur. We can see something we would call hierarchical scale, meaning the artist is using changes of scale, changes of size, to demonstrate different importance, both the importance of a person compared to another person. So Namur is more important than the king he defeats, and they are both more important than, the soldiers who were killed, right, or the scribe who serves Namur, right? So they have scale based on the importance of the person, but also scale change based on maybe the importance of an event, right? Because this is Namur here, but this is Namur there. So we have hierarchical scale in this scene where within this scene he's the largest figure, but the Namur here in the act of actually defeating the other king is of a larger scale, because this event or this theme is more important than this theme. So so we have, once again, that's a hierarchical scale, and that leads to us talking about proportion in general. So we see this idea of proportion, and proportion of size, of shape, and proportion of use in all kinds of works of art. Here are 3 examples where we see that. So that a piece by Mondrian here, right, is all about the proportional balance between the size of one square to a size of another rectangular shape, and the balance between their colors, right, the values of their colors, the values of the places that don't have any color, all of those are carefully balanced between each other. Or similarly in a painting or in the pastel drawing, The Tub by Edgar Degas, we also have this very kind of careful balance of different hierarchical decisions about different shapes. How big is she to the overall shape of the tub itself? How large is this shelf shape, right? And then the scale of the individual objects. Because they're closer to us, they can be a lot larger, but they're still very carefully not, anywhere near large enough to compete in scale or size of shape compared to the major shapes that make up her. And we can see the same, or not the same, but a different kind of careful decision making about size and proportion of shapes here in the Vermeer. And lastly, so this play, this thought about the scale of things and the proportional use of things then leads to another important issue, which is hierarchy. How do you decide where there is emphasis or not emphasis in a work of art? And we will be talking about this issue over and over again throughout this class, but I wanted to talk about it a little bit, kind of introduce the idea right now. Both of these works kind of play with hierarchy and emphasis in similar ways, in that they both, and let's talk about the Sheldon Tapley first, because it's maybe a little bit more obvious because it's got stuff in it, things that we can see. When you first look at it, it's a little bit overwhelming, right? It's a little bit hard to figure out where your eye should light on. It definitely feels like the artist organized it in such a way, trying to give us almost too much to look at, right? And making it a challenge for us to figure out how it's all put together. But as you start to really look at it, you start to see some structural decisions, some organizational decisions that give us a guide of how our eye moves through the composition, and then gives us a guide as to what should be the primary focus and the secondary focus, and then what might be some of the tertiary focuses, right? And there doesn't have to be one secondary focus, but I definitely think this is a major one. This might also be a secondary focus. And then we start having a lot of tertiary focuses. But it's all about that kind of play. And it definitely, I think the pleasure of the work is a lot about the challenge of it at first, how at the very beginning it's a little bit hard to read because it's got so much. Well, in a way, de Kooning's painting here, in a much more abstract way, does almost the exact same thing. It overwhelms us with all of these different kind of intricacies that are hard to figure out, hard to understand what they mean or what they're made, and whether any of them are representations of anything. But as your eye relaxes and you start to look at the whole piece, you start to see structures, such as the way it has kind of like this big oval vignetting kind of shape, like that the shapes get kind of tinier and they start to bend out on the edges, and that the stuff in the middle starts to become a little bit more important. And we start to see certain colors kind of connect to each other back and forth, like this grouping right here of that color, or of this color connecting with some of the other kind of cool and blues. And the more and more we look at it, the more certain elements start to come out, and we start to read that the painting isn't simply just a chaos or a jumble, but it's actually very carefully organized. Okay, that is the end of this lecture, and so hold on a second. All right.